30, Flirty, and Nerdy. My name is Juliana, and today I have Ben Stimpson here. Ben is a pretty cool person. We met online, which I know a lot of people have been meeting online lately, and we met through a Facebook community group for podcasters finding guests. And so I'm really excited because Ben is really an interesting person. They are a therapist, lecturer, student, and spiritual director. You have a lot of topics that you want to talk about, which is like ancestor veneration, power of story, and folklore, which we'll be getting into. You also are in school, which is really cool because you graduated in, was it 2017? You graduated,
So
or
it's
did
kind
you
of
go
all over the
back?
place. Yeah, I started my BA in 2007 and I unfortunately dropped out in 2010. So I've actually gone back to finishing my BA, but I did do a psychotherapy program in 2017 to 2019.
Yes.
So kind of all over the place.
And that's also really cool because you, at the age of like, what, 31, you did the psychotherapy, and then like you just are kind of going through school in your 30s now. And I know a lot of people are very hesitant about going back to school because they feel like they're a failure or finding it challenging because they probably dropped out in the past or whatever have you. And so you just have a really interesting story about what you were like in your late 20s till now. And yeah, I'm just excited to talk to you more about that because we have like been talking before, and just your story I find very interesting, and I want to talk about your journey. We were talking about Saturn return, and for those that who don't know what Saturn return is, it's kind of that midway from 20, 29, 30, 31, 32, and you're just kind of figuring out life in a whole new way. And
Yeah.
it's like everything that you have learned before is just kind of flipped on its head, and you're like, what the fuck am I doing with my life? Which is kind of like why I have this podcast, because it's kind of like a Saturn return podcast for people that are listening.
Hmm.
Because they find that, okay, once you pass through this weird time, life kind of forms better to you and you're able to do what you want to do without feeling lost. But anyway, we're going to get into all of that. And so I'm just excited, and you guys are going to find Ben very interesting and intriguing,
Hope so.
as I do. But anyway, we're going to start with the school topic because I've been having this, like, I would love to go back to school to like actually
Mm,
have a deeper deeper field to work in and study in, because I changed my major so many times. I was in school for like
mm.
7 years and I had
Wow.
to graduate. So I graduated with a psych degree, but it's like, is that what I really want to do? But because I'm in debt, it's like I can't go back to school. And
Yes,
so I wanted to talk to you about, how did it feel for you going back to school being into your 30s? Did you find yourself
absolutely.
like scared, like a failure? Did you find a lot of challenge in it? Because I know that's what a lot of people would feel like. Because that's how I felt. So I'm sure it's kind of worldwide feeling. So how did
Yeah.
you deal with
It's
that?
Yeah, absolutely, Juliana. It's kind of a weird thing. So being in Canada, we have a little bit of a different situation up here. Kids aren't coming out from such massive, with such massive debt. Most of the people I went to school with when I started back in 2005, when I started my college diploma, they were sitting at maybe $20,000 worth of debt instead of like $100,000, right? School just costs differently up here. But that being said, people still, went with assistance, had debt. In my case, I started college first in 2005. I did a social service worker diploma, which up here colleges are like community colleges versus universities. So at that point, I was like, okay, do I want to get some more, because that didn't really feel like it was enough. 2 years was not enough for me, and I was 20. I didn't really know what I wanted to do in my life. I decided to do social work because it was one of the things on the list, and I was persuaded out of actually going and pursuing what I wanted to do, which was a history degree. Like I really wanted to do history, religious studies, something in the humanities, but I was persuaded out of that. So I came up to, okay, well, I want to go to university. So I applied and got into my local university. And at that point, I continued studying. And 2010, I hit a major wall and I dropped out because mental health issue. I was well burned out. I'd been working, I'd been working in residence life. Had a second job on top of that. I was doing full courses, and I was about to start doing a placement too. So I started doing a placement, and within a few months, it was too much. So I dropped out and moved back home with my parents, recovered from that, and then the years just kind of kept going. So I was like, I could go back to school, but it would be moving 2 hours away and trying to build money for that, and this and all the other. So eventually I got to a point where I was just devastated. Like I felt like my life wasn't going to go anywhere. And I tried various different things out because, in actual true fact, I didn't want to do social work. I really didn't want to go into social work and be burnt out because I took a longer path than a lot of people I started with. And I was seeing some of the people who graduated before me burn out, burn out, burn out. Our particular school was focused very much on the system and working in the system and not really being able to do anything. So I was dreading. I went over to the UK to work for a summer in between uh, my the 2 years, and I worked over there, and it was amazing to be back home. I'm originally from the UK, so that was a nice thing. After 15 years of living in Canada, I was living at home and working at home for a summer, and then I came back to Toronto, and it was like, ugh, what now, right? So I moved back home. I started working with my parents. And so then being in my mid 20s and living with my parents, I know it's common now. Back then, it wasn't as common. I felt really isolated and I felt like my life wasn't going to go anywhere. So in 2015, I got a weird sort of nudge. At that point, I'd been doing some vending. I opened up a small vending company. I was starting to go around and doing like vending shows and things like that, selling crystals, selling gifts and things. And I got a weird nudge. And that nudge eventually led me to, in 2017, applying to a psychotherapy program in Toronto. And at that point, I was a little older, I was mid 20s, and I could afford it. The program was pay as you go, so I was able to pay for it as I went, as opposed to have to go into debt, which was huge. And I retrained to in psychotherapy, and I commuted down. I moved to the city, and I commuted back and forth, and it was good. And as I was graduating in 2019, September of 2019, a few months later, the pandemic hit, and all of the clients that I had been working with, because I had to do 120-hour placement, all of them disappeared because no one could afford anything, right? So then I was like, okay, well, I've just moved down to a new city. I moved to a city that had two universities in town, and I was starting to rebuild myself, and I gained a good amount of clients. And at that point, I was like, God, how old was I now? That's the other thing with being in your 30s. You forget how old you are half the time.
I was just gonna say I'm like 30. Let's see, I turned 30 in 2020, I think, and it's 2020. So I'm 31 right. Wait, I'm 31 right now. I'm turning 32. My birthday's at the end of December. So I'm like, wait, how old am I? Like, I have to think about it, but I totally get what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of those aging things, right? It's one of those aging things. But it's like all the pieces, especially with the pandemic. I found the pandemic really jumbled everything up because time just doesn't, like, it's weird now, anyways. So, anyways, 2015, I was 29, so that was my Saturn return. All of these pieces started coming to my life, and it all propelled me towards this psychotherapy diploma, and that really got me back into the mindset of being in school. I found myself in my Saturn return, and then all of these pieces like propelled me towards retraining. And it was nice because when I went back to the school, it wasn't a traditional university, it was a career college. So it was very much, it was just us and nobody else. So that really got me back
So
into the space.
in the US, we call that kind of like a trading school for those that, are listening.
Exactly. So a trading school, the whole course was maybe 30 people, and that was it. So we became really tight. It was a 2 year part-time program, so I could work and study at the same time. And that really was good. That got me back into academia. That got me back into kind of studying mode. And so then in 2020, of course, the pandemic hit, and I had to rebuild my practice again. So I started writing. At that point, the government of Canada was giving us money to support ourselves. I was trying to rebuild my client base, and so I started to sit down and think, okay, well, what are some of my other goals that I want to do? Writing a book which is, we'll talk about that soon, my first book coming out, Ancestral Whispers, I sat down and I thought, okay, well, I'm gonna do this. At that point, I had several courses with clients around this topic. So I was like, okay, well, I have the time now. I'm being supported by the government. I can do this. I also started to think about school, like going back and finishing my BA, because not having a BA, only having a community college diploma, even though I had like spent like 3 years, 4 years at the university, that hurt because so many, at least in Canada here, there's a real hierarchy when it comes to education in psychotherapy. You know, if you don't have a BA, others will look down on you for it, right? It doesn't matter what the BA is in, it doesn't matter, right? So I was like, okay, well, this is where we get to the good part. There are two universities in town. They have really good programs. I'm like, I'm living here. I can support myself. I have a client base that's supporting me. And so here I have a good funding source of money. I think I could do this part time. Like to finish my BA would I contacted the schools. They said to finish your BA, we would give you 50% transfer credits, then you would have to do half a degree, but that would only be 2 years, and you can work it around your schedule. That's no issue. And I had no feeling of like that this is going to be daunting. In fact, I think this speaks more to my kind of ego from where I was at. I was like, oh, this will be easy. Right? Meanwhile, when I actually got into the program, I applied I think I applied in November and I got in December. And how they had done it was I applied for part time so I could start in that January. So I was literally within 6 weeks, I was sitting in a university classroom again. And I was like, well, I don't, I transferred into liberal arts so I could choose whatever courses interested me. And that really helped to really get me into that mode again. And then when I got in, I was like I had 20 classes I needed to do. I'm actually almost finished now. I've got one more semester left. This was last year, January. Thank you very much. Thank you. I started to look at kind of, okay, well, what do I want this degree to be? Because I already have psychotherapy training. I don't need to gain any more psychotherapy training. I already have the social work education, right? I already have a diploma in social work and, a part finished degree in social work. So what is this degree going to be? Is it just going to be for fun? Is it just going to be whatever class I want to take, right? And I'm one of those active learners. I love learning. So I was like, okay, well, no, that doesn't sit with me. So I started to explore, and I kind of hacked the system a bit. What I did was I went to the advisors, the arts school, the department, and I said to them, do you allow double dipping? Now, double dipping is when you can apply a single course to two different minors. And they said, yes, you can. So I was like, okay, well, this makes a lot more sense because when I transferred in, all of the breadth requirements for the liberal arts degree that I'm doing now were completed. So I just had 20 electives I could do. But knowing that I could apply a single class to two different minors was huge. And back when I was in university last time, I didn't even think of minors because, when you're 19, you're just trying to think about, you're a sponge, you're taking it all in. Having had that previous university experience before, I was like, okay, this is an opportunity. So I looked at courses, I sat with the advisors, asked them very specific questions, and now I'm going to be graduating with a bachelor in liberal arts with a minor in medieval studies, classical studies, and religious studies. Because all of the classes that I've taken can cross-fit into all of those three minors.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I know that you're able to do like minors in college here, but
Mm.
I don't know if you could double dip here. So that's pretty cool that
Depends
you
on
had
the
that
school.
option.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really
Absolutely.
cool.
Yeah, it really depends on the school. I was very, very pleased with that. And so I sat down each term, I went and spoke with the advisors, and like they had never seen anything like this. Because again, when you're young, you don't think of opportunities like that because you want to get your degree done and you're young, you're learning everything, right? It's overwhelming. And with me being a little bit older, I especially being in the topics that I love. Like I love medieval studies. I'm from the UK, surrounding us all the time. British history is everything like classical and medieval and pre-modern, everything, right? So it wasn't new to me. What I found struggling was being older in a classroom full of young people. That's some of the struggle there. So long-winded
Right.
answer. I hope that answered your question.
It did. And I also want to know too the struggle that you had with that internal struggle of being with the younger generation to now. Like, was that, do you think that was just like a you thing you had to go through, or do you feel like that's more noticeable with other people? Like, were the kids in your class kind of like, what is this like older guy doing in our classroom? Or like, did you kind of get that sense, or what do you think it was more coming from internal that you felt that way?
I think it's both. I've now that I've had a chance to like I've done what, almost 15 classes. I think it really depends on kind of what year you're taking. When taking a first year course, you've got kids who are straight out of high school. They may have never really experienced, like, speaking in an environment like that, let alone with somebody who is, maybe 20 years older than them, right? Almost. I'm not quite, but almost. I think the people who are in upper year courses, they're a little bit more seasoned. Some of them actually might be a little bit older too. They're like in their early 20s, mid 20s, some of them. And I think it also depends on the courses too. But I went in, I'll be honest with you, I went in with a head on me that because I was older, I knew it all. Because I had been in university and college for, like, at that point, 8 years, post secondary, various different programs, that I knew it all, I was wiser. And that really kicked me in the ass because with some of these courses, you have people who they are really enjoying these courses. A lot of these minors I'm taking are ones that people find later in their university career. So, I took a couple of first year courses. Most of them are upper year courses. So these are people who are really loving the content. They're engaged, right? So some of the conversations we were having floored me, really humbled me. First of all, how intelligent a lot of the younger people in the class were, how engaging they were, how they thought about issues. And I think that also speaks to some of the professors too. The professors have learned how to engage students because they've been teaching for like the last, however many years. Whereas my only frame of reference is when I was young and their age, back when I was in university last time, right? It was a struggle at first. Once I actually got into the course and the material, though, it was great. I often have to sit back, though, and think, okay, I know the answer, but the questions being asked not for my benefit, but for the benefit of the others learning, right? So I need to shut my mouth.
That's really
There's
kind of
also,
cool.
yeah,
Sorry, I
it
was just
is.
gonna
It's
say.
no, 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 no. It's okay. No, it is kind of cool. It is that, like, learning. Okay, this is a facilitation thing for others. It's not about me showing off, me knowing that I know something. But
Hmm.
also, I've had humbling experiences where I thought I knew something, gave the answer, and it turned out not to be right. And I'm like, wait, but I learned that when I blah blah blah, right? And so it's been a really big learning opportunity for me, and that's been really powerful.
I'm a little jealous, not gonna lie. I kind of wish I could go back to school. And then like, oh, it doesn't seem too bad now. So that is, yeah, that's definitely a humbling experience, as you said. And I feel like you're able to take a step back and see the picture from a whole different viewpoint. And I feel like you're able to really focus in on the lecture because I knew when I was back in that time, I was like, oh, I just want to be done. Like, I don't want to be here
Yeah.
anymore. Like, I don't want to be sitting in class.
Mhm.
And I used to love learning too, but I feel like now I look at it at a different approach, kind of like how you did.
Yeah.
And you're really like into the conversation. And it's like, oh, that would have been like, that would be really cool to like hear from the younger generation and hear from like
Yeah.
the professors. You're kind of like in the middle. But
Absolutely. Yeah.
and I kind of want to switch gears just to
Hmm.
just tweak it a little bit.
Yeah,
In
sure.
your application, you talked about how you want to mention how time is like a spiral thing and not a linear thing.
Yes. Yeah.
So I want to talk about that. And if you feel like
Hmm.
going back to school, did the spiral thing come with that because you felt like you're spiraling back and back? Okay, let me see if I could rephrase this. When you went when you're going back to school, did you feel like time was kind of spiraling backwards for you and not going forwards? Or like what do you mean by time
Absolutely.
being
Yeah.
like a
Let me explain
spiral
what I
and
mean.
not
Yeah.
linear, but Yeah.
I realized this, and I now that I work, so I have quite a few younger people who I work with as clients, and some of the issues that they're talking about. It's very evident that when you're young, and I experienced this too. I don't think that this is necessarily a kind of a unique phenomenon, but I think when you're younger, your sense of time is very linear because you don't have necessarily the bank of experience to put things into perspective, right? So if you're, 18, 19, and your scope of experience only gives you so many years and experiences, you might then see them on a linear path versus what I've discovered as I've aged is that I come back to similar places in my life every few years. So for me, my cycles are every 2 years, every 5 years, and every 10 years, which makes sense when you think about it, because certain times in your life, certain developmental stages, certain kind of milestones, right? When you hit 20, when you hit 30, and when we hit 40 eventually, those are like big cultural milestones, right? Those are your decade years, right? But I also started to notice that every 2 years, similar patterns were happening in my life. And I think that's different for everybody. Everybody has different sort of cycles. So, when I'm 36 now, I can think back to when I was 26 and there were big things happening in my life. I can think back to when I was 16, there were big things happening in my life, right? It's not the same stuff, but I'm in a similar developmental place. So, kind of thinking about Saturn return in that way. So, Saturn return is, at least theoretically, when you return back to when Saturn was in the same place in your astrological chart, and so it tends to be a time of kind of the next stage of your life. And you think about it. I mean, this whole podcast is about that, right? Your 30s. I could not be doing what I do now in my 20s. I just didn't have the same experiences in life to give me that perspective. I think perspective is huge in that. So, what I've really come to understand then is I might be in a similar place, but I'm not the same person. And that's key when it comes to thinking of time as a spiral as opposed to a linear time, because I can now anticipate things that might be coming up for me because of it happening to me years ago. But now I have equipped myself with the experience of 10, 5, or 2 years ago, right?
So you're using the spiral kind of technique as looking back and then kind of transitioning your future to like prepare yourself to what's to come because of the patterns in your past that you recognized as a
Absolutely.
spiral. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's those cycles of
Yeah.
time. It's like those concentric circles and cycles of time. And that's a worldview. I'll be honest with you. Not everybody's going to see time that way. But for me, I found that was a very powerful reflection tool for me to think about my life and put things into context. And I did notice that like with the 2 years, for example, I started school 2 years ago. I'll be finished within a 2 year span. Where I'm coming up to in December of this coming year was kind of where I was 2 years ago because I was just starting that university course, right? Same with when I was in school previously for psychotherapy, it was a 2 year course. So when I was coming to the end of that, I was in a very similar emotional place of anticipation for the future, of hopefulness of the future, as I was 2 years before when I started it, right?
Yeah, it's interesting and I feel like because we're kind of in that midway point of life, I guess you could say. I mean, like we're halfway to 60.
Mm-hmm.
And like we were when we just started what 18 like high school 18 and
Mm-hmm.
going into college and all that. You're right, like we didn't have that much experience as
Mm-hmm.
we do now. And it's like we lived half a life almost, which is kind of scary to say, but I also know now the half life moved up to like 40,
Mm-hmm.
45-ish around there. But even then, it's like we're getting there and we're able to kind of see, like you said, like how we felt about certain things in the past, like after each kind of mark. And with Saturn return, it's kind of like taking a step back and really looking at all those patterns and being able to recognize that for the future, which is really cool.
It is. Mhm.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so I wanted to ask you too, since we're talking about like, you know, going through the process of going to school, getting new degrees, doing all of this stuff, have you found ways to reinvent yourself aside from going back to school within like personality, friends, family life? Did you see a big switch in that too?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And all of them are connected. I know we were talking about this before previously outside of this recording. So many of the aspects of my life right now work off of each other. My professional, my spiritual, my social, kind of my psychological, all of those things are working off of each other. I'm not sure it's reinventing, but it's definitely distilling. I see myself as a distillation process. I work with that idea of like alchemy, this certain idea of like soul alchemy, for example, which is burning away all of the excess and the impurities and really coming down to a pure essence. I tend to work a lot with spiritual psychotherapy in my work. And it's that idea of concentrating who I actually am so I can become more aware of that. So a very good example of that is 2 years ago, I uncovered for myself that I'm non-binary. And that was a huge weight off my life because up until that point, for so many pieces, I don't know which strain to think about. Up until that point, I had been a very, very angry person. Going back to cycles of time. So when I was 8 years old, I moved from the UK to Canada, and it was one of the worst things that ever happened to me because I came over here. I had a lisp, I had an accent, I didn't know the culture, I didn't have friends. All the people that I grew up with since we were very little were all back in Wales. And I was surrounded by people who didn't want to know me, didn't care about me, all of this. So for me, at that moment, I had a weird relationship with control in my life, and I was constantly trying to find ways of trying to find control in my life, and that unfortunately made me a very bitter, angry person up until really only a few years ago. But I noticed that when I was able to, I went through a very healing process around that. I did quite a bit of therapy. I went on, I don't know if I can really say, I don't think I'm going to say, but there were certain substances that were used, and I was able to finally put into perspective how much of how much I was actually at fault in my own misery, right? I was perpetuating my own misery and destroying my relationships with people because I needed a sense of control in my life because I felt like I didn't have any, right? As soon as I put all of that understanding together, and I was able to put aside that feeling of despair and anger, then suddenly I was able to look at myself in with different eyes, and I could start to deconstruct those ideas of who I was aside, and I took ownership of my life. And that was only a couple of years ago. That was only about 3 years ago that I really cemented that process. And it had started when I was 29, back in 2015. I had some bizarre experiences happen that I think really propelled me forwards. And I speak about some of them in this book. Ancestor work did a great deal of help with that. But in kind of understanding those pieces and understanding how a lot of those pieces were my self-inflicting pain on myself, I was able to then not reinvent myself, but certainly take ownership of my life. And in that ownership, I'm like, I only have so much time left in this world. I have so much I want to do, and now I have the confidence to do it. So going back to school was part of that. Coming out as non-binary was part of that. Writing a freaking book was part of that. You know, if I could tell myself from 7 years ago where I am now, I think he would be very proud of who I am now. And back then, I even told myself, I'm going to change my life so that the person I am in 10 years' time can look back at who I am now and be proud. And I am very proud of that person. Mm.
That's amazing. I'm still learning about the different terms of LGBTQ. And so when you mentioned that you're non-binary, I'm kind of like, okay, that I because I actually last night just kind of did research about what everything meant.
Oh
So it's
yes,
kind of mean like you feel like you're non-gender conforming, correct?
exactly. Yes. So non-binary basically means I don't identify myself through this particular lens of gender. So
Mm-hmm.
so many of the ways that we identify ourselves are through quite limiting kind of singular things. For example,
Yeah.
I'm seeing you have black hair, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is having black hair a big part of your identity?
I mean, it's just my hair.
It's just your hair, exactly. So
Yeah.
why then would we ascribe so much identity to gender, right? That's so non-binary for me means I'm not female, but I'm not male in the way of like society constructs that. I'm just me. That's who I am, right?
And because you came to that realization, you were able to find confidence more within yourself. Is that kind of what that did for
Absolutely.
you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those who are watching this video, I'm wearing a baseball cap backwards. I'm wearing like really revealing, like kind of, like low cut shirt here, right?
Yeah.
10 years ago, 5 years ago, I would not feel comfortable with my body. Like I would not feel comfortable with revealing myself. I would not feel comfortable wearing really like traditionally masculine clothing because like when I was in high school, I wish I could show you a picture, but it's nuts. I was wearing bulky sweaters, track pants, even on a really hot summer day where it was like 80 or 90 degrees outside, right? Um, and it was because I didn't feel comfortable in my body. I didn't feel comfortable in my masculinity because I was gay. I'd just come out, but there was a lot of other stuff going on for me. And so as soon as I was able to kind of see through that lens and that dynamic, suddenly I was like, what? I actually feel comfortable growing up one day. So I started going to the gym. I started wearing like, like really like kind of, gym bro sort of, clothing, backwards baseball cap, all of that. And I'm looking at myself in the mirror and I'm like, damn, I look really good.
I love that you're able to feel comfortable in yourself after like kind of getting all of the, I guess, terms of identification to who you are. You're able to be like, okay, yeah, this is who I am, and you find that confidence, and like you said, you're able to go to the gym and able to like feel better within yourself, like outwardly as well as physically. It just definitely, I feel like, helped you be more, I guess, mature in yourself.
This is
And
where the word reinvent comes in because
yes,
you said something very
exactly.
in particular in there. Feel comfortable in myself. When I actually started feeling comfortable in myself, and again, I don't think I would have been able to do this when I was in my 20s, just for myself, right? Then I could start to reinvent myself. That I could play. I could figure out, like, okay, maybe I can experiment with this, all of that, right? And find out what really does feel comfortable to me, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah, no.
Yeah,
And that confidence builds on confidence. That's
right.
something I work a lot with clients on. Confidence builds on confidence. If you wearing a particular type of clothing or a particular color or experimenting with something is going to give you that short boost of confidence that can be a seed that you can build off of. And I also think that coming back to your podcast theme, I think that when we hit our 30s, we have enough life experience to put things into perspective that we stop caring about things. We stop caring about
Yeah.
stupid things, right?
Oh my God, 100%. Like, since like being on my own, living on my own apartment,
Mm-hmm.
being able to really find who I am again, I'm starting to like wear different types of styles out and about, and I'm starting to like decorate my place how I want to decorate. I'm starting to kind of really feel more me, but now it's like I'm able to really experiment, and like I really want to dye, like I've been wanting to dye my hair for so long. Like I wanted pink bubblegum hair
Yeah.
at one point, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like I don't know if I could do that now, but I could definitely like play around with wigs and play around with color. Like a friend of mine is hosting, well, we're going to a party here in Vegas, and it's like a funky, like, I don't know what it's called. It's like a very like futuristic anime, bright colors, and
Mm-hmm.
I have this outfit that I planned. Let me show you. I think
I'd love to. Let's see. Let's see.
it's
Let's
so
have
out of my comfort zone. Like it's
a
it was really hard coming up with it, but I was actually able to like find a top that works now with it. And like these bright ass, what is it? Like space shoes, and
Love it. Oh, I
you
love
see
it.
it. Let me
I
see if I
love
could send it
it.
to you on Facebook real quick so you could actually see what it's like, because it
What
is
it's like. Yep.
crazy. And it's just like the it just goes to show that the finding your style and like being comfortable in the clothing that you're in, it's like, okay, like
Hmm.
I'm trying to find more of who I am
Hmm.
inwardly that I could show other people outside.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But
And I will say this, I think that was one of the biggest learning pieces for me going back to university and suddenly being
mhm,
surrounded by a lot of younger people. I think that it is easier for teenagers and people in their early 20s now to do what we're just starting to do now. And
yeah,
I think that has a lot to do with culture, a lot to do with kind of where they're at. I'm really impressed with where the kids are these days. I hate saying that
yeah,
word kids, but it's true, like they're young, right? Um,
right.
they have their own struggles. They're dealing with their own issues. They're dealing with stuff we didn't have to when we were younger. But I think they're a lot more interested in playing around. I think they're a lot
Yeah,
more interested in experimenting.
for
Okay, let's
sure.
come to this. Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it.
Isn't that crazy?
That's,
Like
I love it.
I got the same color top, but it's like a different
Hmm.
style almost, just because it's a little more comfortable. But yeah, it's definitely really fun and really
Yeah.
crazy for me. But you're
So,
right.
so
Like,
here, okay, psychotherapy question then for you.
oh no.
I know I'm the guest here, but I'm going to turn the. So when you look at those colors, what do you see of yourself in those colors?
Hmm. Bright, energetic, like
Hmm.
stuff like that. And I don't know how much you could see in my room right now, but it's very pink and very colorful.
Yeah,
So it's like kind of bringing that onto my body. It's definitely weird, but I think it's gonna be
yeah.
fun.
Yeah,
So
that's exactly it. Color
yeah.
is huge. I actually,
Mhm.
with my clients, I have a big. Well, when I had my physical office and virtual now only, but I had a big bowl of stones, and they were all like
I have
crystal
crystals
stones.
everywhere.
I love it. A technique that I found was very useful for anybody on kind of a self exploration journey was I asked them to think about that part of themselves and then pick a stone that they saw reflected that, and we would talk about it. I had a whole session once with somebody around lapis lazuli. What is it about lapis lazuli that reflects, and is it the deepness of the blue? Is it that cute little gold filament that goes through? What is it? What is it about this stone that draws you? We had a whole huge conversation about that. Color is huge. People don't realize how powerful color is. Hmm.
Right. And I love
Yeah.
that you use crystals in your work, because I have crystals. I used to make jewelry with crystals actually. And so like I have a whole setup. Like let me just grab some real quick. Hold on.
See,
Uh, let's see.
sky.
So like here's some crystals that I have right now.
Oh, love
And you
it.
mentioned
Love
lapis
it.
lazuli.
Hmm.
There's
Yep.
that one here.
Hmm.
And then I have this one. Like I these are just like a little bit of what I
Hmm.
have,
Hmm.
but
Love
carnelian,
it. I love it.
right? So I love crystals, and I feel like they could really help with growth as well, because if you go to a place and like a
Hmm.
crystal store, and you just kind of
Hmm.
like look around and you don't know what any of them mean, but you go and like you're always drawn to one or two,
Hmm.
right? And there's a reason for that. And people are like, oh, like, I don't believe in crystals. They don't really have energy to like all this stuff. And it's like, sure, they're just rocks, but at the same time, it's like they're pretty rocks, and a lot of them
Yeah.
have meanings behind it. So when you look deeper into the meanings,
Hmm.
you realize that you need that rock for a reason. Like I've had one where that I drawn to about entrepreneurship, and that's when I
Oh,
just started
yes.
entrepreneur
Mm.
life, and it's like, oh, I actually do really resonate with this crystal. And I don't know why we're getting into crystal conversation. This wasn't even a part
That's what
of
we
the
are.
questions, but yeah, it definitely is a way for you to look deeper into who you are and to kind of explain why you're going through what you're going through. in terms of, oh, this crystal is telling me I need to focus on this specific thing. So
Absolutely.
anyway,
Absolutely.
crystal
No,
rant.
I'm actually really glad that I'm really pleased that we did. So something I started practicing a while ago, and something that has really helped me kind of encapsulate my life and really understand my life is touchstones and keepsakes. So what I do is I practice a form of self-reflection of like I call it memory palace. So memory palace, it's a memory technique. It's the ability to remember large amounts of information through association. And something that I've done to keep myself in perspective and to kind of just understand my life, understand me a lot better, is I have collected little trinkets. So I like to collect trinkets. And what I do is I try to find a little object that is meaningful, whether it's because it represents a particular time in my life, a particular person, a particular idea that's been important. And I found that visualizing my life in that way has actually been very helpful in putting perspective into my life. And especially as I age, and I think most people do when they're in their mid-30s, we start to understand that, we're not going to be around forever. Not when we're like 20, where, we've got 80 years ahead of us, hopefully. I think when you start to get into that phase of middle age, you're like, okay, yeah, I need to start thinking about like what is the next goal. So what I did was I've collected all sorts of little trinkets, right? And what these allow me to do is they allow me to honor those parts of my life and those parts of myself, and also kind of keep it secret too, because, I have a collection of stuff here. Nobody really knows except me what it all means. In thinking about kind of like my university career, going and buying like a little pin like this. This is the pin of my university. This isn't just a pin, this is all the work I've done. And I can hold it and I can feel it and I can touch it. And when I have it on, sometimes I'll have it on like on my cap or something like that, right? It means something. It's like a little, okay, I'm proud of this little thing, but it's really that big thing inside of me, right? So I think crystals do the same thing. We can work with crystals in the same way, meaning we can bring meaning into our lives. We can bring vision. And that's really, I think, what all of this is. It's about envisioning who we are, right?
Mm. Yeah, I love that you collect trinkets because people making scrapbooks with photos, it's kind of like a
Exactly.
viewpoint of your life and who you are. And of like you said, it's for you, it's not for anyone else, and that's special.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think people our age in their 30s, that's a practice that we can do for ourselves in whether it be scrapbooking, whether it be collecting trinkets. Nostalgia is looking back to also look forward, right? And that's, I think, tying into what I was saying about seeing time as a spiral as opposed to a linear line, right?
Right. So we are running low on time,
Yes.
unfortunately. I just looked at the time and we've been talking for about like an hour
Oh wow.
almost, which, and because we started at what, like 11, and that was before we even began to talk more into our conversation, which is really fun. We might, if you're up to it, do a part two because I've been really enjoying this conversation.
Absolutely, yeah, anytime.
But yay, but I wanted to ask you the very big question that
Mhm.
this podcast is centered around of is what advice do you wish you had before turning 30 that you could tell those that are just starting their Saturn return? What advice do you wish you had, and what do you hope to gain in the next coming decade of your life? Because you're kind of going towards that same feeling that those at 29 are having probably going
Mhm.
into your 40s. So like you're 36, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, so
So
if you
you're kind of like inching up into that space now. And so like what would your advice be to people listening?
two pieces of advice. One is to stop caring about what others think about you so much. That's been a huge key piece for me, is to stop caring about what other people think, because they're not living your life, they're not walking in your shoes. Like, stay accountable to yourself. Stay accountable to your own sense of authenticity, right? Second one as I approach kind of middle age of 40, a few more years left, but is spend time doing the things that give you joy. You know, I spent so many years worrying about what other people were thinking about me, and that prevented me from just living my life. It doesn't matter what your parents think of you if they don't like what you're doing in your life. Doesn't matter, because they're going to die and you're going to have to live the rest of your life, after they're gone. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter gaining somebody else's approval if their approval is based on their own vision of who you are, right? Doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that you can wake up in the morning and feel that you are in a place of not even authenticity. We'll say authenticity for now. Yeah. That you can sit and honestly tell yourself at the end of the day, you know what? I am being authentically me. Right. That's the biggest piece I would say. The struggle with that is that I can say that to people, but until they actually go through it themselves and come to that realization themselves, it won't land. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much
Yeah.
for that. And that is another big theme of this podcast that I've been noticing is being authentic. You should be authentically you, even though it might be hard at first, but then saying that, oh, I don't give a fuck anymore, I'm just gonna do me, is so powerful that you don't understand unless you actually make that switch, like you said, and then you're
Yeah.
able to fully come to terms with it, fully be like,
Absolutely.
okay, I don't care what other people think. I'm just gonna do what I do, what makes me happy. I'm gonna have all the nerdy things in my room that I like, wouldn't have bought before, and it's gonna make
Yes.
me really happy inside. I'm gonna dress how I want to dress. I'm going to be who I want to be. I'm gonna, love who I want to love and just kind of live life as a human who doesn't give a fuck what, being authentic.
Mhm. Exactly. And you said something very interesting there. You said, I'm just going to be happy. The key to happiness is about reclaiming for yourself your own value, right?
Mhm.
And I think at that point, we start to then realize that happiness is a temporary thing. Contentment is the long-standing thing, because you'll be like that. Life is like that, right? Peaks and valleys. But if you can stay in that mindset of that middle zone, that's contentment. You might
Mhm.
not be happy from day to day. You might be really sad from day to day, whatever it is. But if it's like contentment is being able to then see overall, okay, yeah, I'm pretty content. I'm pretty content. Yeah.
Hmm. That's amazing. Thank you. And
Welcome.
before we sign off, I want
Hmm.
to do a little bit of late housekeeping, which I should have
Hmm.
done in the beginning, but it's just me. Anyway, I want to mention to all the listeners out there that if you are interested in finding more about the podcast, if you want to know more about behind the scenes, kind of like listen to full recorded audio that is kind of like raw, unedited, you could do that over on my Patreon. The link will be in the show notes. Thank you to Benny, who is our Patreon as of right now. And also, if you have any questions, concerns for future guests, if you want to be on the podcast yourself, just let me know and we could set up a time and hang out and tell your story of your 30s and anything like that. Just send me a message. I'm be happy to chat with you. And thank you to everyone so far that's been listening to the podcast. I really truly appreciate you. And thank you so much, Ben, for coming on the show and for being an awesome guest and being vulnerable. I really appreciate that.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on. I will plug myself though, if that's okay.
Yes, of
If
course,
anybody is
absolutely.
interested, so I do have a book coming out in September. It's on ancestral veneration and doing ancestral work. I found that was very, very important for me as I entered into this stage of life. You can find out more at www.benstimpson.com, as well as all my other offerings. Thank you so much for having me on.
You're welcome. And I'll put all of your information down in the show notes for
Perfect.
people to get in contact with you and find your website and all that good stuff too. Yay, thank you so much. And I hope
That was
everyone has
good.
a great
Yeah.
day.
Hey friends, thank you for listening to today's episode. Please take a moment to follow and review this podcast so it could reach others. Also, if you leave a review, I'll be sharing your review in the next episode. Lastly, if you want to be part of this growing podcast, chat about your life, your profession, passions, or if you have advice that you wish you had at 30, please sign up at the link provided in the show notes. I would love to have you as a guest on the show. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.